people love the unknown. Well, I can't wait to not know what's going to happen next. So that discomfort. Carrie made me eat a marshmallow raw. I have never done that. I put myself in situations where I have to stretch myself. This this doesn't qualify, but it still was. Do I really want to do it? So how do you feel about unknown? Can you think about what your attitude is? And you know why that matters? Is because now, whose example was it about the husband? So attitudes matter because once you change your perspective, the situation changes. And the power that it gives you and the control that it gives you in how you respond to it. It's still unknown. You don't know how he's going to respond or behave or say, but you know what you're going to do, how you're going to perceive it, react to it or not, respond, and that becomes a game changer in terms of the outcomes. So there's going to be a lot of unknown. And I know that the transition is kind of becoming much more stable for the organization now. But if you are planning to be the best foundation and the place for the donors to go to, then one of the things that will not change is you will continue to strive for that perfection, to be the best. And that means there will be many, many unknowns in the future. So what are you doing proactively to become comfortable with that unknown? So what we call these things are protective factors. So things that actually have been shown to make a big difference in terms of our ability to bounce back from any adversity. And 5 things. Have you heard of Brené Brown? She's the lead writer on vulnerability. Amazing research from her. If you haven't watched her TED Talk, I highly recommend you do so. It's one of the top 10, I believe. It's on vulnerability. And she has written many books. Start with her first book, The Gift of Imperfection. Amazing. And her research demonstrated that there are many, many traits that people who are resilient have, but these 5 are protective factors that are consistent across people that are able and willing and consistently bounce back from adversity. They're resourceful. They're good at problem solving. They don't just sit with the problem. They're more likely to seek help. I have never realized the power of this more than I did after becoming an entrepreneur. And the humility it requires to ask for help is profound. It's an immense strength. So those that are able to do so are much more likely to bounce back from adversity. They hold the belief that they can do something that will help them to manage their feelings and to cope. And this is where your organization's optimism comes in. You were not watching or answering those questions in the survey with rosy-colored glasses. You were objective. And in that objectivity, you still paired it with the belief that things are going to be better, we're going to make it so. We have the potential to make it so. That is a resiliency sign. They have social support available to them, and you know what? It's usually not available until you have cultivated it, and who knows better than people in foundation that you have to cultivate a relationship for a time before you can ask or take something out of that relationship. And lastly, they're connected with others such as family and friends because they do recognize that the permanency of comfort and acceptance that comes from those 2 sources is profound. So what we're not going to do today, but what I have for you, something to take away. It's not homework. I promise you this will give you insight. It's a very simple tool on resilience, and if you can pass it along, please, Hallie, thank you. The idea is do it on your own time. You're basically answering yes or no to questions. It will help you identify what sources in your life are your strongest protective factors. And why that matters is if something is already working for you, it's a good idea to continue to invest in that. And if something is particularly weak, it's an opportunity to see if there's a part of your life that you have been ignoring or somehow it has lost its significance. Is this something you can do to build it up? So it's an activity at the end in terms of what you can do with it. Nothing urgent, nothing earth-shattering, but it will provide you some reflection of where the greatest sources of support for you are coming from. Stress. Anyone not familiar? Okay. And what do you think of? What are the words that pop up when you think of stress?
Anxiety.
Okay, anxiety, yes, the most commonly associated.
Fear.
Fear. Anything else?
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty.
I think expectations.
Expectations.
The last 5 minutes of building a tower.
Oh, that was stressful. But that's a great example because what happened in those last 5 minutes? Do you know how much more productive you were in those last 5 minutes as compared to the 15 before?
Do you know what our heart rate is?
Yes, but the point is stress is also positive. And that anxiety, if you have no anxiety about performance, you are not going to have the optimal performance. You have to care enough to get that heart rate up and get all your salience focused on this task so that you can really do an amazing job. But when that anxiety goes overboard, it becomes debilitating. When that heart rate becomes so high that actually my physical body is impacting my mental cognitive abilities, and I am neither functioning well mentally or physically, that I'm not able to carry on. The reason I mention this is because the narrative of stress is exactly what you said. The negative words we associate with that. Can we reframe it? So the latest research I read last week was that people who have a mindset that they believe stress offers an opportunity. It offers me an opportunity to do something different, to overcome a challenge, to be creative, to figure out a new solution. They have much greater likelihood to find positive outcomes from the same stress that the people who have a negative mindset about it are not able to overcome. They become debilitated faster. So I invite you to think about, is it possible for you to think about stress differently? And the best way to do it is think about the examples when, like the last 5 minutes of the tower building, when you actually benefited from stress. And like my theme for the rest of the day, where I can't remember who said what, there's another quote. I don't remember the author, but she says, if it wasn't for the last 5 minutes, nothing would ever get done. So, and I hate that, the rush it creates. But it also, we work with constraints. And as we talked about, constraints are required for innovation. So can you see the stress in your work and offer a different perspective? Maybe it will change how you do that work and how you deal with it. So we have been throwing words around. What does that mean to you when we talk about resilience? And we talked about resilience throughout the day, actually. Every story lent to resilience. And there was no small pivot. I know some people felt, oh, it's not big enough. It's big enough. It moved you, it was big enough. So would somebody articulate what that resilience is?
Determination.
Yes, thank you.
It's your capacity and ability to not let stress prevent you, or the stressors in your life, from preventing you from moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, let's say something traumatic happens. We heard stories here of shit that happens to people. And people with resiliency, they can move beyond it.
Mm-hmm.
They look at it and they say, okay, this is a life-changing moment. I'm going to move forward.
Yeah.
But they were able to do that because of resilience. People who don't have resilience can't move forward, or it takes them much longer to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is that determination, but focused around overcoming some adversity or negative circumstance. And how you build it, I believe everybody has the capacity for resilience. And Maya Angelou actually talked specifically about children, that they have a profound capacity for resilience. They can overcome any adversity. It's actually comforting to hear that. We also have that ability, especially when we make sure that we are building the protective factors in our life. And we'll talk about what are the factors that can help us in addition, especially in the work context. So, how many people talk to themselves? Don't read. Yes, yes, yes. And why do you? What do you say? When do you talk to yourself? All the time?
Yeah. Okay, you can get this done. Just focus.
Ah.
When I'm trying to rationalize something.
Okay.
So I'm kind of presenting this, that, and this, and hearing it out loud. It's like watching my own mind work.
Excellent. Awesome.
Pep talks, right?
Pep talks, which is the most common way. So using it as a third voice to actually objectively see the situation, to make sure that I can motivate myself and to actually get perspective. All of these are amazing features of self-talk. We don't value the power of self-talk in building resilience. So anytime in your life, at work, if you need to get focused, because it actually, so a lot of research in this is in sports psychology. And what they really found is that the mental work that the athletes do before they actually do the performance, the routines, they do self-talk. They're taught self-talk. And why? Because it creates focus. Focus on what you need to accomplish. And it does many other things in terms of regulating your effort, making sure that emotionally and mentally you are prepared, not just for what you want to accomplish, but how are you going to do it? So running that through in your head. And lastly, it triggers automatic execution. You do it enough. Every time I say, okay, Sandeep, time to get it together. Now I know I have done this many times where I say that to myself, and what's the next step? So the automation that it creates. But what's the best way to do self-talk? 2 ways. When you talk to yourself, don't say, I really need to get this together. I have a presentation. Not I. Use third language. You. Sandeep, you really need to get this together. You have a presentation. Why would it matter to use, not say I, and talk to yourself in third person?
Because it's like someone else is saying it to you.
Supporting you.
Yes, yes. And what does that do is we actually believe others more as compared to when we try to tell ourselves good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And also it triggers times of when other people have said complimentary things to us that reinforced or reminded us of our successes. People usually think you have to be very confident to be able to be a high performer. In reality, high performance comes before confidence can come. You become confident because you were successful. You were successful in that little task you had to do. You were successful in the next task, in getting the job, in getting that donor, in getting consecutive donors. That's what builds your confidence. So it's not the other way around. So when you hear you and your name, it's a game changer. It gives you objectivity. So anytime you're doing self-talk, make sure you talk to yourself as with your name and you. The second thing, if you think, oh, I can't do that. That seems so weird. So then you think of your cheerleaders. Do you have a cheerleader? These are people who, no matter what, always think you can accomplish anything. My mom is my biggest cheerleader. My sister, I have an amazing family. I think they're my biggest cheerleaders. Who is the cheerleader in your life? And as I talked about, I have to do work on being kind to myself. So I use this strategy. I think of my mom and what she would say to me. Sandeep, you can do anything. So that is powerful. This is Kat Cole. She is the CEO of Cinnabon. And she talked about this story where she said whenever she needs to pick herself up, she thinks of her mother. And that's the tape that runs in her head. And her mother would say to her, even when she was a little girl, you can do anything. She had a very tough life growing up. She was a part-time waiter at Hooters. And by 40, she became the CEO of Cinnabon. And that business, is a global enterprise. Huge accomplishments. So there is power in self-talk. So that's the first step. What story are you telling yourself? That's a second. And the stories I heard this morning, even though we don't articulate it as such, but the closing, you have perspective. This is a gift. We talked about gratitude. And I can if I overcame that, I can get through anything. And I have purpose that moved me. And I'm going to continue to move on. But if your narrative is, negative, then that becomes a reality. Have you heard of the self-fulfilling prophecy? So I walk into the room and let's say I'm late and I'm frantically getting set up to facilitate the day, and I don't say hello, I don't smile at anybody, and they're like, oh, she has so much attitude. And then you're like, whatever. And then I start talking and you're, reciprocating. You're like, well, she has to earn that trust and likability. So now I'm thinking, oh my God, this group is so cold. So soon enough, I don't try hard enough. And what has come within half an hour is what you thought was true. I became that cold person that you thought I would be. And contrast that with the other expectation. Oh man, she's rushing, she's late, whatever, making up that story. But the narrative dictates what happens, the consequence of the events. So checking your narrative becomes important. And the last piece about your resilience is about your identity. We talked about the team identity. This one is about you. So if I ask you, what are some of the words you would use to describe who you are? So when I say, who are you? Don't give me sentences. Give me descriptors. Almost like titles. I've done this a gazillion times, so if I were to give you my example, it's a whole mishmash of I am a woman, a feminist, a woman of color, amateur photographer, world's best aunt, that's my goal. I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, I am an academic, I am a strategist. These are all pieces of my identity. And when I fail as a strategist, I'm still an amazing aunt. And I'm still an amazing daughter or sister or whoever. People who have complex, full lives, where they have multiple identities, they are the ones that are able to buffer when adversity hits in one sector. Because as somebody said, shit will continue to happen. So if it's happening at work, can I find comfort in my personal life? And if I can't find comfort in my personal life, can I find comfort in my church, in my spirituality, in my hikes, in my photography? I need to go back to that confidence from things that I do really well, that make me feel good about myself. So do you have complex identities? Multifaceted, multi-tiered? Or are you so focused on one identity that you feel you've really disproportionately given yourself and your life? I'm guilty of it. I used to be a workaholic. And as I shared this morning, it's part of my goal in creating my business to make sure that it's a life that is much more balanced. Am I successful? My friends will tell you, not so sure. But at least it's on my terms. The autonomy allows me enough flexibility that, yes, when there's work, there's a lot of it, but then I take the downtime that I need. So similarly, nobody else in my family owns a business or runs a business. Everybody's in a full-time job. They create resilience in their own ways, and they have their own identities. So when you do the exercise, I invite you to think, and take a moment if you want to right now, about is your identity complex enough and multifaceted enough where you're balancing your focus on your family, spirituality, your passions outside of work? Because when you do that, you're actually better in every single facet of your life. Mary's example this morning was important to me because when she said, when she took care of one part of her life, everything else got positively impacted too. And that is what systems theory talks about. It's the butterfly effect. The hypothetical that a butterfly flaps wings in one corner of the world and there's a tsunami in another. But that's over-exaggerated. But to say that you do something and it has implications for so much more. So of that which is within your control, because that's important. If you try to do things that are outside of your control, I can't expect how somebody else is going to behave. I can only control my own reaction to them. So of that which you have control, what do you need to work on to be more effective than you are today? And this desire to be constantly better and to be your best self and to feel that pride in your work, in your life, it actually is an intricate balance between the two. So identifying not just my dream, but what is within my control and what can I do immediately. And that's what I want to focus on in terms of the way forward. So in closing, resilience will come if you're focusing on building an identity that is multifaceted and multi-tiered. It also helps to build a habit of self-talk that is using the third person language or cheerleaders. And lastly, managing your narrative. If you are using a narrative that is set in a negative mindset, you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that's creating more hassles than actually may exist.